Occurred in the Simpson matter. Mr. Simpson is again present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Blasier, people represented by Mr. Goldberg and Mr. Darden. Mr. Blasier.
Good morning, Your Honor. I had one other exhibit that I got last night that is a couple of excerpts from the California Association of Criminalists Code of Ethics that I may use this morning, and I provided the court with actually my only copy, so I told Mr. Goldberg about it, but he has not seen the copy. Also, we did not deal with knife number 118 yesterday. I think we all forgot about it. We need to deal with that this morning.
I'm sorry.
118, the knife that was ordered produced.
Okay. Do we have those reports?
I thought Ms. Clark either had them or gave them to the court.
No reports.
I have them all here, Your Honor. I thought she had given them to you as well.
Your Honor, is it permissible for us to handle this issue when Ms. Clark is here, since she was addressing the court on it previously?
Your Honor, I'm going to be getting into this relatively quickly. Ms. Clark said she was going to provide you with the reports. Mr. Goldberg knows what's in the reports. It's not terribly complicated.
All right. Do we have the item here?
Your Honor, yes, we do. Your Honor, as the court recalls, the people did ask permission to reopen, which the court said you would consider in the event that the court were going to allow us to get into this issue. So I just wanted to remind the court of that, because if that were the case, then perhaps...
All right. Is 118, item 118 here?
Yes.
Yes, it is. All right. Unfortunately, Mr. Blasier, the reports that were just submitted to me appear to be 12, 15 pages. All right. I haven't had the opportunity to read them at this point, so until I have that opportunity and hear from the counsel, we won't get to that.
Well, then I would ask that we wait. That's part of my cross-examination, and I'm going to get to it probably within an hour or so.
Well, then why don't we proceed for an hour, and then when we get there, maybe we'll be at an appropriate time to break, and I'll be able to read the reports. All right? Any other comment?
No.
All right. Let's have the jurors.
Your Honor, may we have that copy back of, or at least have extra copies made so Mr. Goldberg can review it?
Oh, sure. I thought you had provided copies to Mr. Goldberg.
No, that's my one.
All right. Maybe I get one of the law clerks to make me a copy of these items. All right, let the record reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Mr. Matheson, would you please resume the witness stand, please? Mr. Matheson is undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Blasier. Good morning, Mr. Matheson.
Good morning.
You're reminded, sir, you are still under oath, and Mr. Blasier, you may continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Matheson, good morning.
Good morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Mr. Matheson, I'd like to ask you some questions about Mr. Simpson's reference blood sample. That's item number 17, correct?
Yes, it is.
And that had originally been logged in as item number 18, and the number was changed on it, correct?
Mistakes the evidence is to log in.
Sustain. Rephrase the
It
question.
had originally been recorded by Mr. Fung and Ms. Mazzola as item number 18, and that number was changed, correct?
That's correct. At some point it was believed to be 18, and then it was corrected.
Would you agree that the suspect's reference sample in a criminal case is an extremely important piece of evidence?
Yes, it is.
And could you use the analogy that with a wheel, all items of evidence are compared to that, correct?
To that and other reference samples, yes.
And that reference sample, in effect, is the hub of the wheel from which everything else is looked at, correct?
Along with other references, yes.
And if the integrity of that reference sample is compromised in some fashion, then that would affect the validity of the analysis of other things that are compared to it. Would you agree with that?
Overruled.
Yes, if there is some problem that compromises the validity of it, then there is a concern, yes.
And would you agree that with respect to blood samples, many tests can be run on extremely small amounts of blood samples?
That's correct.
And would you agree that by virtue of that, that very small amounts of blood could be used, hypothetically, to contaminate large numbers of items of evidence?
Vague, overbroad.
Overruled.
I'm not sure what you mean by very small and large quantities. You could well, if the samples come in direct contact with each other, sure, there could be transfer and contamination.
And we talked about yesterday that as small as 1 or 2 nanograms, 1 or 2 billionths of a gram of blood can be tested, and you can get results using DNA testing, correct?
Misstates the testimony.
Overruled.
That very small quantities, yes, can be detected and tested.
Now, would you also agree that blood, in a sense, is anonymous in that by just looking at it, you can't tell where it came from, can you?
No, you cannot.
And by the same token, a swatch that has what appears to be blood on it, just by looking at that, you can't tell anything about where that came from, can you?
That's correct.
Now, when blood is drawn from a suspect, it is done in a hospital setting, is it not generally, or a medical setting?
Irrelevant.
Overruled.
In a medical setting, yes.
The detectives don't do that in their office, do they?
No, not normally.
It's done by a trained person who knows how to draw blood, correct?
It's my understanding, yes.
Now, have you drawn blood before yourself? Do you know how to do that?
No, I don't.
Have you seen it done?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the techniques that are used to draw blood?
Only on those that have been used on me.
Are you familiar with the technique where a syringe is used to take blood out of a vein, and then the syringe is injected into a vacutainer?
I've heard about it. I've never seen it done.
And the vacutainer, or the tubes that we've been talking about, you were showing a couple of them yesterday, or the other day, you recall those?
Yes, I do.
And they are manufactured with a vacuum inside. That's why they're called vacuum tubes, correct?
That's correct.
So that when a needle is stuck into a vacutainer, it tends to suck in whatever might be in the syringe, correct?
Well, as far as... Well, there is a vacuum. It's going to try and draw in whatever is stuck into it if there's a needle with an opening in it.
And do you know how much blood would be drawn in, given the amount of vacuum in a vacutainer, how much blood would be drawn in just on its own coming in from a syringe? In other words, nobody's pushing on the end of the syringe. Do you have any idea?
No foundation for
Sustain, rephrase the question.
Do you have any idea how much blood would be drawn into a vacutainer, given the amount of vacuum that is in those containers, if you just stuck a syringe with blood in it in the top without pushing the plunger down?
It's an incomplete hypothetical and no foundation.
Foundation, sustain.
Have you ever done any experiments on trying to determine how much blood goes into a vacuum tube because of the vacuum in that tube?
No, I have not.
Here, I have an exhibit, like Mark.
Mrs. Robertson. $11.35. And Mr. Blasier, what is this?
This is a vacutainer that contains some cranberry juice.
All right.
Mr. Matheson, let me show you this exhibit, which is 1135.
11:35.
And I showed you that, I believe, yesterday, did I not?
Yes, you did.
And I gave you a measuring device so that you could verify how much cranberry juice was in that vial, did I not?
Yes.
And we verified that there are approximately 8 milliliters in that vial, correct?
But when I poured it off and measured it, I measured 7.5.
And we noticed that there was some still in the bottom of the tube, correct?
That's correct.
So there is 7.5 plus what was in the bottom of the tube in that vacutainer, correct?
Correct.
Now, you described that, I believe the other day, as a 10 milliliter tube, didn't you?
That was a assumption I had, yes.
It actually holds, if the cap is off, a lot more than 10 milliliters, doesn't it?
Yes.
It holds approximately 14.
I don't know. I would want to measure it.
Okay. And when you were estimating on the stand 2 days ago, I believe, how much blood would be half of the vial, you measured from the top of the cap to the bottom of the vial, did you not? I think you put your finger on the top and your thumb on the bottom, or maybe the other way around.
Actually, not to the top of the cap, but to the top of the glass part of the tube.
Now, 8 milliliters of blood in that tube would essentially look very much like that, would it not?
Well, the fact that I measured it yesterday, yes.
Now, is blood heavier or lighter than water?
Blood is slightly heavier.
Do you know about how much?
Not very much
Not
at all.
very much.
There is a slight difference, though.
Do you know how much that vial weighs?
No, I don't.
It weighs very little, doesn't it?
That's vague.
Can you estimate the weight of that vial?
Not just by feeling it, no.
Is it important that blood samples, such as a suspect's reference sample, be transported carefully?
Vague is carefully.
Overruled.
Well, you want to transport anything carefully, particularly if you're dealing with a biological sample, so you don't spill it.
You don't want to break it either, do you?
No.
And is it appropriate for one criminalist to put a sample of blood in a trash bag and give it to another criminalist to transport without telling that criminalist what it is?
Argumentative calls for any conclusion.
Overruled.
I don't think it's inappropriate, no.
You would recommend that that's okay to put that in a trash bag, give it to somebody, don't tell them that it's in there, to let them carry it around?
Argumentative, asked and answered.
Overruled.
Well, if I would be concerned if just a vial was dropped into a trash bag or something and then handed to it, but the fact that it is in other packaging and there's a little bit of padding there, I don't think it's wrong in doing that.
How about taking that trash bag and leaving it on a counter or on a table overnight without telling anybody that it's in there? Would you recommend doing that?
It's not a great procedure, no.
And you have janitors at SID, correct?
Yes, we do.
Now, I want to go through the records that are maintained at the lab with respect to all records that you have of withdrawals from Mr. Simpson's reference tube. Do you have that in mind?
Yes, I believe so.
Now, I want you to assume, for purposes of a hypothetical, that you started with 8 milliliters of blood, approximately. You have that in mind?
Okay.
Now, your records indicate, do they not, that on September 14th, criminalist Colin Yamauchi withdrew approximately 1 milliliter of Mr. Simpson's reference blood.
I remember that reference, yes.
And do you need to look at the record to make sure of that?
It would be good, yes.
Okay. Let me show you a serology item description note.
Okay.
And that's consistent with what you said, is it not?
Yes, it is approximately 1 milliliter.
Now, on June 20th, blood was withdrawn for purposes of doing toxicological analysis, correct?
I don't know the exact date. I'd like to see a record of that, too.
Sure.
please.
Let me show you a toxicology document.
Okay.
And that indicates that as of that date, there was 5.5 milliliters, correct?
Objection, no foundation for business records, hearsay.
Sustained.
You recognize that document as a regular form that's used in your toxicology unit?
It looks familiar, yes.
And those are filled out in the regular course of business of the people that work in the toxicology unit?
I believe so, yes.
And do you know who filled that out?
Well, looking at the initials, that is not one of my units, and I have not worked with this person, but the initials are consistent with Elisa Flaherty.
And are those are filled out during the normal course of conducting an analysis, correct?
It's my understanding, yes.
And they're filled out, I'm sorry, were you done?
Yes.
And those are filled out at the time that the testing is done, correct?
I said it's my understanding, yes.
And does that appear to be,
No foundation.
and that indicates that as of the 20th, there were 5.5 milliliters in that reference sample, correct?
That's what the form indicates.
Now, on some point around June 27th, Mr. Yamauchi withdrew some sample from the reference tube for purposes of doing electrophoretic analysis, correct?
Okay, I'd like to see the record. I believe he did a notation of having removed some portion of the blood on the 25th.
Okay,
of June.
let me show you a record. And what is a thread, by the way?
A thread is a small portion of cloth.
Just like it sounds.
Yes.
And when you use the term a thread in the context of electrophoretic analysis, what does that mean?
Well, thread is used, you put the sample on it, whether it's extracted from another item or a whole blood sample, let it absorb onto this thread that's approximately a centimeter, a little over a quarter-inch long, and that's what's placed in that gel that was shown a few days ago.
Now, why don't you take a look at that document I gave you and see if that refreshes your memory about some of that reference sample being removed on the 27th.
Seems that's not an evidence that we had a number of it.
Ooh. Yes, this does indicate that on June 27th, some threads were
And that's
prepared for electrophoresis.
I'm sorry. And that's your note
Yes, that's in my writing.
of your observation of that thread being removed.
Oh, threads, yes.
Now, approximately how much blood is necessary to make a thread?
Oh, I've never measured it, but the quantity of blood to actually make the threads is quite small. Matter of fact, it may even be less than the amount of blood that's left in the pipetter that we use to withdraw the blood.
Okay. Now, on the 25th, the records indicate that there was another withdrawal from the reference sample, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And let me, would having a record of that help refresh your memory?
Yes, it would.
still states facts not, assumes facts not in evidence that he had a memory.
Sustained. Sustained. Sustained.
Do you have a recollection of blood being withdrawn approximately the 25th for certain types of analysis?
I was not present at that time, but I was made aware of it.
And you've reviewed the records about that, have you not?
Yes, I have.
And you remember what's in the records, don't you? Or do you?
Not everything, no.
Would it help refresh your memory to see the records?
Yes, it would.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Now, does that document appear to be a form document that's used in your laboratory?
Yes, it is.
And are those filled out at the time that the actions described in the document are taken?
At or about that time, yes.
And does that appear to be filled out in the appropriate manner?
Yes, it does.
And do you recognize the handwriting?
Yes.
Whose handwriting is it?
The majority of it on the page is Mr. Yamauchi's.
What does that document indicate with respect to the removal of blood from Mr. Simpson's reference sample at that time?
No foundation.
Overruled.
It indicates that on June 25th, there was approximately 3/4 of a milliliter removed.
And that was for what purpose?
For, I believe, ABO typing and some initial electrophoresis work.
Now, is there any indication on that record about an additional amount being withdrawn for toxicology?
Well, it doesn't reference it being removed for toxicology.
What is that reference?
That refers to the quantity of blood that's present in a microcentrifuge tube that was with the blood vial.
Now, microcentrifuge tube, that's a little tiny tube that has a kind of almost a pointed bottom, correct?
It's a plastic tube, correct, that has kind of a conical shaped bottom with a snap cap on the top or a screw top cap.
And that holds about 1.5 milliliters?
Yes.
Now, that record indicates that as of the date that Mr. Yamauchi withdrew 3/4 of a milliliter for serological purposes, that there was a microcentrifuge tube there with the reference vial, correct?
That was packaged with it, yes, that's correct.
And you're familiar with that little microcentrifuge tube, are you not?
Yes, I am.
You've seen it and you've measured it, haven't you?
Yes.
And how much blood is in that microcentrifuge tube now?
At this moment?
Yes.
I don't know.
How much was in it when you measured it?
I would have to reference one of my notes.
Sure.
Trying to locate the date in which one of those determinations was made.
You need straight edge.
No, thank you. Okay, I have a reference from September 21st that gives a total measurement for the blood vial and the microcentrifuge tube. I did not delineate how much was in each.
And that indicates what?
On September 21st, 1994, that there was approximately 3.8 milliliters total of blood.
Now, you recall in January of this year that you measured as precisely as you could the amount of Mr. Simpson's blood that was left.
I would want to confirm that.
Why don't you check your records?
I have a reference in my chronology that a request is made by Deputy Goldberg to determine the quantity of the blood present. I did not record on that chronology what that amount was.
What did you determine the total amount to be?
At that point, I don't have notes on it. I believe I just telephonically advised him. On January 4th, 1995.
I have two pictures I'd like to have marked.
$11.36, do you want to do A and B, or $11.36 and $11.37?
1136 A and B.
All right.
Let me show you a photograph, 1136A. Does that appear to be the blood tube, the reference sample of Mr. Simpson with the microcentrifuge tube?
Yes, it does.
And let me show you 1136B. Does that appear to be another picture of the same thing from a slightly different angle?
Yes, it does.
Could I display these on the Elmo?
Yes.
Looking at 1136A first.
All right, Mr. Blasier.
Now, Mr. Matheson, that's the photograph you identified as Mr. Simpson's reference sample, correct?
Yes.
And that little tube at the bottom is the microcentrifuge tube that we were talking about?
Appears to be, yes.
And that was a 1.5 milliliter tube. That's the capacity of that little one, isn't it?
Mr. Harris, we need to see the bottom of that.
There we go.
Yes, that's a standard quantity for those tubes.
And what does the business record indicate was remaining in that microcentrifuge tube as of approximately June 25th?
According to Mr. Yamauchi, he put approximately 3/4 mLs or milliliters.
And that indicates that that microcentrifuge tube, that was the blood withdrawn for the toxicological analysis, doesn't it?
As to what indicates?
The business record that you have in front of you.
It does not specifically say that's what it was for in this record, no.
Would you agree that there is a number, 1477, associated with that entry?
Yes, there is.
And what does that stand for? Do you know?
I believe it's a reference number in toxicology.
So, and that's a number that's assigned to a sample of blood when it's sent for toxicology, correct?
I don't know the inner workings of their unit, but it's a number that appears on the tube.
And is that the ID number of the technician that does the work generally?
I don't know that, no.
I have one other photograph.
1137.
Matheson, let me show you 1137. That appears to be another photograph of the vial.
Yes, it is.
And do you see initials on there, on that vial? WF.
I see initials. It's not WF.
What is it?
I believe it's LMF.
And LMF is who?
I believe that's Lisa Flaherty.
And she's the person that does toxicology, correct?
She works in that unit, yes.
And is there a number next to her initials?
Yes, there is.
What's that number?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's her serial number. I don't believe it
Oh,
is.
no, I'm sorry. I meant what, tell us what the numbers are.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's,
Check that there's no foundation for the photograph when it was taken. Also discovery.
Sustained.
Your Honor, on the latter objection, could I be
Sustained.
heard?
Sustained.
Mr. Matheson, do you recall, I believe in January, when I visited the lab along with Mr. Taylor and Mr. Scheck?
I know you were there, yes.
Let me show you 1136B again. You remember us taking photographs and measurements of the reference tube?
Yes, I do.
I object on the same grounds, foundation and discovery.
Overruled.
Recognize your hand in that picture?
I'm not sure if that's my hand. I do remember manipulating the vial.
Okay. Is there any doubt in your mind that that's Mr. Simpson's reference blood vial?
No, there's not.
Okay. Now, I'd like you to look at the purple top on that vial.
I still object on discovery grounds.
All right, let me see counsel at the sideboard. got to let the court reporters sit down and... All right.
Let me again show you 1136A. And I want you to look at the top of that vial between the purple top cap and the glass. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
And do you agree that there appears to be blood smeared on the purple top cap in that position?
There does appear to be small quantities of blood in the cap, yes.
Now, when you withdraw blood from a reference tube such as that, you don't pour it out, do you?
No,
You take a pipetter and put it in the blood, take the blood up into the pipetter, and then take it out, correct?
correct.
And the proper procedure is to do that, presumably without spilling the blood all over the vial, correct?
Of course, you try and be as careful as possible.
And that's the standard procedure that's used anytime a trained person like yourself removes blood from a vial like that, correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor, the Elmo doesn't portray this very well. May I have the jurors view these pictures?
Yes. And if you just hand them, as soon as you finish looking at them, hand them to the next juror so we can speed this up just slightly. All right, Mr. Blasier, would you collect those items from Deputy Smith, please?
Now, Mr. Matheson, I think you testified that from your measurements there was 3.8 milliliters as of what date? Totally remaining blood?
I believe that was September 21st. Yes, on September 21st, approximately 3.8 milliliters.
And that included the blood in the microcentrifuge tube, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Now, on September 30th, a sample of that blood was released to the defense, correct?
I'll confirm that in my notes.
Let me show you a record.
Yes, that's correct. Approximately 1 milliliter was released.
And those are your notes made in the regular course of your work, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And when you released that 1 milliliter to the defense, you used a graduated pipette, did you not?
I used a automatic pipetter that draws up 1 milliliter.
So you can determine 1 milliliter from using that pipette fairly precisely, can't you?
Yes.
Now, when you measured the amount of blood left in January, that was around the time of our visit to the lab, my visit and Mr. Taylor's and Mr. Scheck's, correct?
Approximately, yes.
And you provided us with the total measurement of Mr. Simpson's reference sample at that time, did you not?
I believe I did. I seem to remember making a copy of something.
And I want you to assume hypothetically that there was 2.8 milliliters of blood left at that time. You have that hypothetical in mind?
Improper hypothetical.
Overruled.
Your Honor, I'd like to use another exhibit at this time.
Not at this point.
May we approach?
No. We've already had our discussion on this. Proceed.
Between the taking of that reference sample on June 13th and the time that you measured it in early January, are there any other records, business records of your agency or the Los Angeles Police Department of withdrawals from that reference sample?
There are no records that I can recall, in addition to the ones that we've talked about, other than what is implied by the testing that I did, and I did not specifically record that I'd withdrawn a certain amount.
So that you're aware of no other withdrawals from the business records from that blood other than the one you just alluded to?
As I'm sitting here right now, I would, to be absolutely positive, I would like to go through all of the pages and notes that were between that time frame.
But you reviewed all the notes in preparation for your testimony, haven't you?
I've reviewed many notes, yes. It's quite voluminous.
And you've known for quite some time that the issue of how much blood was taken out of that tube has been an important issue, haven't you?
Vague, argumentative.
Overruled.
Yes, I've been aware of the issue.
Your Honor, I would like to use the exhibit.
No. It's a foundational problem still, counsel, as I indicated to you. You can use it when there's one more piece of the foundation there. Proceed.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? Mr. Matheson, every time something is taken out of that reference tube, initials are put on the tube. Isn't that correct?
Whenever somebody uses that tube in some way as far as testing or removal of a sample, they're supposed to initial it. That's correct.
Let me show you, again, exhibits 1136A and B and 1137, and ask you to tell me each and every initial that's on that blood vial.
Okay, I see one, as mentioned earlier, that was LMF.
And that would be for toxicology, correct?
That's correct. There's what appears to be an initial above that I don't recognize. I'm not even sure I can read it. Above that on the tube are my initials with the date 6/27/94. And then above that appear the initials of Colin Yamauchi of 6/25/94.
Mr. Matheson, let me stop you for a second. And would it help you to look at a record of all of those initials in your handwriting?
Sure.
Is that a business record in your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
And that's a recordation by you of all of the entries or initials on that blood vial, correct?
No foundation
Overruled.
under business records exception.
Sustain on the business. Are you going to use the record or using this to refresh his recollection? What are you doing here?
Let me ask you, did you make that particular document in the regular course of your business?
Yes, I did.
And you did that at a time when you were actually looking at the blood vial and the paperwork to determine what was on the blood vial?
Yes,
And you wrote it down as you did it?
that's correct.
Thank you. Your Honor,
No
Could I-
foundation.
You want to mark this as 1138?
yes.
Objection, no foundation.
Overruled.
Now let me show you 1138, and could you tell us from that record what withdrawals are indicated, or what are all of the withdrawals that are indicated from that record?
Assumes facts not in evidence and indicates withdrawals.
Overruled.
You could list them in chronological order, please.
There's no information here that says when withdrawals were made. There are initials and there are dates. It doesn't specify what work was necessarily done on each of those times.
All right, let me ask you a question. When someone takes blood out of that for purposes of doing work, they initial it at that time, correct?
That is one of the reasons, yes.
And they write down the date that they do that, don't they?
Normally, it's not required.
But if they wrote down a date, there'd be no reason why they would write a date different from the date they put their initials on there, correct?
Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Is that correct?
They shouldn't, right?
Okay. What are the recordations on that blood vial in terms of people having access to it and taking things out of it?
So I should, because there are references here that are not for when things were taken out.
Okay, well, let's go through all of them, and then we'll pare them down.
The ones that I see on this record is the J1477 LMF.
And what's the date of that?
There's no date associated with that.
Okay.
GBM 62794.
And that's you.
That's correct. CY for Mr. Yamauchi 62594. And then a 61494 CY. Those are the markings that are on the tube itself, according to my record here.
Now, there are also markings on the envelope that the tube is contained in, correct?
That's correct.
And they also indicate when people initial opening that envelope, correct?
That's some of the information that's here, yes.
And tell us what those entries are.
There is one that is CY 61494, a GBM 93094, followed with the notation for split. Then GBM 1495, followed by the notation to determine quantity.
Is that in your handwriting? I mean, I'm sorry, that's the entry that you made, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
There is also as far as notations that appear on the envelope, also I have referenced here a note by Fung that says received from Van Adder 61394.
Now, going back to the tube, can I put that on the envelope, please? Sure. Focus a little better. Now, Mr. Matheson, incidentally, for the record, the highlighting is mine. I put that there. Mr. Matheson, the first entry for the vial is in terms of dated, is CY on 614. That's Colin Yamauchi, correct?
That's correct, along with the number 18.
And would you agree that that corresponds to the record that you've already identified as Colin Yamauchi's withdrawal on the 14th of approximately 1 milliliter for DNA testing?
Well, I believe that 1 milliliter was for swatching, yes.
For swatching, okay. And would you agree that the entry of CY Colin Yamauchi for 625 of 1994 corresponds to the record that you identified where he indicates 3/4 of a milliliter taken for himself and the presence of the microcentrifuge tube with 3/4 of a milliliter?
Calls for speculation, conclusion, opinion.
Overruled.
Well, that entry is no longer visible on the screen, but yes, it corresponds to that
Okay.
time.
And the entry in your initials on the 27th, would you agree that that corresponds to the withdrawal that you made, that you indicated you made no records of?
That I didn't record the quantity that was removed, that's
Okay.
correct.
And did you make any recordation at all about work that you did on the blood that you removed on that date?
There was analytical notes, yes.
Do you have those notes here?
Yes, I do.
Could I take a look at them?
It's associated with the report that was written, completed on 6/28/94. There's one blood analysis summary sheet, a blank or a not form page where I recorded some data along with a serology item description notes, and then some electrophoresis pages that actually cover a couple of different days.
Now, would you agree that that blood analysis worksheet was filled out by Colin Yamauchi, not yourself?
Actually, we both have entries on here.
Okay. So you both did the same work at the same time?
Well, he started some of the work 2 days before, on the 25th, and then I was involved and completed some of the work on the 27th and the 28th.
Then the 3/4 of a milliliter he indicated on those records that you're referring to is what was taken out for the work that you and he did during that period of time, correct?
It misstates the evidence because of
Sustain.
Is it correct that the 3/4 of a milliliter entry that you've already testified about around that time, that's the work that you and he did that you just testified to?
still misstates the evidence.
Sustain.
Is there an entry in the records indicating the withdrawal of blood from that vial for the work that you just testified to?
There's an entry of the work that he did, but there is no quantity mentioned for the work that I did.
So are you telling us that you took blood out of that vial to do work and made no entry anywhere of the withdrawal of that blood?
Asked and answered, argumentative.
The fact that blood was removed is implied by the fact that I did work on it and received results from it.
You agree that withdrawals of anything from evidence, when you take something away from a piece of evidence, should be fully documented?
Overbroad.
Not anything and fully documented, no. The fact that results were obtained on an item implies that we removed blood from that item. I described the item that's worked on, and results are obtained from it. There is no reason to make exact notations of the quantity that is used, particularly in a liquid sample from a living individual.
Is there a reason to make any notation?
There is notation in that work was done on it and results were obtained.
Now, I think you indicated that that particular withdrawal was approximately 1 milliliter, correct?
I believe I gave a range that it could have been from 1/2 to 1.
And how much actual blood do you need to use for the testing that you did? It's not very much, is it?
For the ABO test, it would take about, the actual test consumes about 6 drops. The electrophoresis altogether probably doesn't even take a drop, but there are things such as the blood clinging to the sides of the pipettes and that type of thing, and that'd be it.
Okay. Now, so the testing takes, I think, about 6 plus, just 6 drops total?
Probably 6 to 8, somewhere in there.
And there are how many drops in a milliliter approximately?
Approximately 20.
Now, the blood that you didn't use for that particular withdrawal, you put back, didn't you?
Not necessarily.
Do you recall talking to Mr. Regal in about August at the time that he visited the lab about whether you put that blood back or not?
Yes, I do.
Recall telling him that you put the blood back.
I believe I said I thought I did, yes.
And so that if you put the blood back, then all of it would go back into the tube with the exception of the 6 or 8 drops that you used plus what might have clung to the tube.
That's correct.
And have you ever done any kind of test to determine how much would cling to the tube?
No, I have not.
Mr. Matheson, I want you to assume for purposes of a hypothetical that you started with 8 milliliters of blood. Do you have that in mind?
Okay.
I'd like to use the exhibit.
Nope, I still told you, you have one piece of the foundation that's not there yet.
To save some time, may we approach?
Proceed. We've had this discussion, Counsel.
All right, Mr. Matheson, for purposes of this hypothetical, let's assume that 8 milliliters of blood was drawn from Mr. Simpson on the 13th, okay?
Okay.
And the toxicology records indicate that on 6/20, there was 5.5 milliliters left, correct?
No foundation for the hypothetical.
He's testified to the
Assumes
record.
facts, not in evidence.
Overruled.
Okay.
And the only withdrawal from Mr. Simpson's blood between the 13th and the 20th was Mr. Yamauchi's 1 milliliter, correct?
That's correct.
And would you agree that under that hypothetical with those figures, as of the 20th, there is approximately 1.5 milliliters of Mr. Simpson's blood unaccounted for?
Improper hypothetical, Your Honor, argumentative, no foundation.
Approximately, that would be the difference between what toxicology approximated on their date versus what is being told to me in the assumption of starting with 8.
And approximately how many drops are at 1.5 milliliters?
Well, if we assume that there's approximately 20 in 1 milliliter, that would give us about 30 drops.
And 1 drop of blood, depending on the size of the swatch that you use, you can make at least 5 swatches, can you not?
Depending on the size of the swatch, sure.
You could actually make more than 5, correct?
You can make 4 and you can make less, yes, or more.
So that
or
if you
less.
use this, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, depending on the size, yes, you could either make more or you can make less.
So that if you used a size swatch that allowed you to make 5 swatches per drop, with 1.5 milliliters of blood, you could make 150 swatches, couldn't you?
Given that hypothetical, yes.
Now, I think you testified on direct that blood that is collected in a vacutainer has a preservative in it called EDTA, correct?
In this particular tube, yes.
And that is a chemical that's put in there to keep the blood from coagulating, correct?
It's my understanding, yes.
And there are procedures that are available to determine whether that particular chemical is present, correct?
No foundation to this witness.
Rephrase the question.
Are you aware of procedures available called gas chromatographic mass spectrometry to determine the presence of that chemical?
I know that GCMS, which is the short version of the instrument you used, does exist, and it's used for identifying different types of chemicals and things. I don't know of any specific procedure. I've never been involved in testing for EDTA, but I would assume it could be done.
Now, hypothetically,
No foundation for any further questions on this line.
Haven't heard the question.
I'm sorry?
Haven't heard the question.
Hypothetically, Mr. Matheson, if blood from this case, from an evidence item such as from the back gate, showed the presence of a chemical, EDTA, would you agree that that is consistent with it possibly coming from a reference vial?
That is an improper hypothetical. It's inconsistent with the known facts.
Overruled.
As you stated it, if it was present in it, if it was able to be identified in it, it is possible that it could have come from some type of reference sample that previously contained EDTA. I don't know what the sensitivity limits are of the instrument or exactly how much EDTA is placed into a tube, but given the hypotheticals you stated, it's possible.
And hypothetically, if there was the chemical EDTA found in the blood on the socks, would your answer be the same, that that would indicate that it may have come from a reference file?
Your Honor, improper hypothetical, no facts, no foundation for it.
Overruled.
Argumentative.
We would also have to assume or make the assumption that there's no other source of EDTA that could have gotten on those socks. Then yes, I'd agree.
That other matter now. I'm getting close to that point.
Well, why don't you finish what you have here, then we'll take that up at our break.
May we respectfully request the court's guidance on the use of an exhibit?
Counsel, we've had this discussion.
Mr. Matheson, do you have any information regarding the amount of blood that was originally drawn from Mr. Simpson?
Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
No personal knowledge.
Rephrase the question.
Do you have any personal knowledge of, or do you have any information regarding the amount of blood that was drawn from Mr. Simpson?
As phrased, no foundation for personal knowledge.
Overruled.
The only information I have regarding that quantity was what I heard during the preliminary hearing.
And that was from the nurse who drew it, correct?
Well, this calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Do you have any reason to believe that the amount of blood drawn from Mr. Simpson was anything other than 8 milliliters?
Your Honor, that calls for speculation. and
Sustained.
hearsay.
On to the next topic.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a 15-minute recess at this point for the jury. Please remember all my admonitions to you. We'll see you back here in about 15 minutes.
Perpetrator, that's going to be the blood of the victim. So if what Mr. Blasier is saying is that that is indeed a true type B and not a BA, then this knife is completely irrelevant, because as we know for sure, none of these victims was a type B. Now, if what Mr. Blasier would like to argue is that this is actually the blood that's a BA type degraded to a B, that's fine. I don't know what he does with his inconsistent argument that the type B found under her fingernails was actually not a BA degraded, but a real B. That becomes internally inconsistent. So their position is revealed by their insistence on this piece of evidence to be both logically and scientifically ridiculous. There's no relevance because it was obviously not there at the relevant time. It was planted there by someone else. We also have a situation in the testing of this item that reveals that there's no PGM obtainable. Obviously, what we have is very degraded blood on this knife. The EAP came back B in one spot, and, excuse me, Your Honor, I'm talking fast because I know you want to get this done, and B inconclusive on the EAP marker. But there was no PGM obtainable from it at all, showing how severely degraded this blood is. So that, all of those factors put together reveal how irrelevant this piece of evidence, quote unquote, really is. I would like for Mr. Matheson to address further the scientific issues if the court would like to hear that concerning the significance of the degradation, the loss of the PGM marker. What is interesting in contrast is that the fingernail scrapings from underneath Ms. Brown's fingernails reveals we do have a PGM type that is consistent with her, which tends to further buttress the fact that the blood type EAP is a degraded BA. But on this knife, we have nothing. All we have is a type EAP that shows a B and a B inconclusive, no PGM activity on the blade of the knife, which would be the blood of the victim. So what does that have to do with this case? At a point in time after the metal detectors have swept the area, it's more nonsense, red herring is what it is. And under 352, it would be unduly misleading, confusing, and time-consuming to this jury to chase down yet another dead end that the defense wants to throw in their face. May I confer one moment, Your Honor? Yes, Mr. Darden points out further that it would take about 5 witnesses to resolve this. We would need the searchers who did the metal detector sweep. We would need Detective Payne, who received the tip. We would need the persons who found the knife. That's another 3 people who found it. And then the analysis of the knife by Mr. Matheson. We're talking about quite a lot of time to chase down something that is completely not only irrelevant but ludicrous in this trial.
Mr. Blasier?
Yeah, I resent the notion that we planted this evidence. There were 4 people that have nothing to do with this case that we've talked to who found that
I
knife.
didn't hear that comment made, Counsel.
Well, I did, I'm sorry. They say it's not relevant because they don't want to believe it. It has blood on it that's consistent with the blood under the fingernails. That makes it relevant, whether they like it or not. It is relevant evidence, and everything that she said goes to weight. It should not go to admissibility.
All right. I'll make the, for the purpose of this particular item, the package of reports, Court's Exhibit number 10. All right, let me read it. We'll take a recess, and we'll see what we do with it.
Before we do that, I would like to make a record on the exhibit, if I might.
Counsel, you've had your opportunity.
Your Honor, I don't think we did that on the record, and I apologize if I've missed some step here, but I don't like to play a guessing game, and I'm sorry, and I apologize for that. But I don't know what you want. I thought that we had covered everything that we had talked about, and I'm asking as a courtesy for some guidance. That's all.
We'll stand in recess. Times sustain the objection, first on the basis of foundation, secondly on the basis of Evidence Code Section 352. Given the, at this point, speculative nature as to where this particular item came from, how it was found, how it was came to the police attention at a date significantly past the relevant dates where these locations were previously searched, I'll sustain the objection.
Your Honor,
As to the exhibit, Mr. Blasier, the court's concern is the initial assumption as to the initial amount. What I'm saying to you and what I've indicated to you is that at this point, I don't think you have the foundation for it. At some later point in time, I suspect you will.
No, I thought that maybe that's what you were getting
Yes,
at. What I
that's-
wanted to do, though, and is do that subject to connection. And obviously, I can make an offer of proof that the nurse testified at the prelim that it was 8 milliliters. And the people have been allowed to introduce test results from that blood vial subject to connection, and I'm simply asking for the same. Their exhibit boards were subject to connection as well.
All right. My problem, though, with this one, Mr. Blasier, is that it is in the form of argument, and since it is demonstrative evidence,
Actually, Your Honor, I have a plate to cover up that. I have a plate so that there's no text on it at all. Could I use it under those circumstances?
let me see it. Since you've modified it since yesterday morning?
I'm sorry?
You've modified it since yesterday morning.
No, actually, I had a plate just in case there was a problem with that particular entry. For me.
Works for me. You know, if you anticipate these things to begin with, Mr. Blasier, I mean, why do we have these pitch battles over things that you... Well, never mind. Never mind.
Your Honors, the court now will pursue its ruling as to the use of the...
I said that that could not be used given the way it was marked because I didn't think it was factually correct. All right?
But there are still some factual inaccuracies that I mentioned to the court yesterday, which I don't think the court felt you have to get to, such as the fact that the dates are,
I thought all of
amounts
that-
were approximations. On the business records, they have a little squiggly.
No, I understand that. All right,
And
given the modifications, I'm sorry, Mr. Goldberg.
And on one of them, it indicated that Mr. Matheson had removed blood on the 25th when it was Mr. Matheson had removed blood on the 25th when in fact it was Mr. Yamauchi.
I thought all the notations had been withdrawn from that.
Are all of them withdrawn?
I won't put anything up there.
All I
that's
saw
not
was a test tube and amounts, is what I saw. I saw no dates, times, places, people.
accurate. I did have some tag. I'll only do what he agrees with, certainly. I won't do the one with,
Just out of curiosity, given the magnetic nature of that, how heavy is that?
actually, it's not too heavy.
Well, the amounts don't designate that they're approximates. And there is no designation of the amount that Mr. Matheson during his testing.
Mr. Goldberg will tell me how to make an approximate blank for that. I'll be happy to do it. I don't know how.
All right.
Approximation.
All right, any other comment, Mr. Goldberg?
Well, the problem with the amounts is that they're asserted to be definite. They're not approximations, and also there's no foundation from the witnesses as to how they measured them. We heard from Mr. Matheson how he made his estimations when he came up with an approximation that the blood vial contained 2 milliliters at a point in time that we know it had to have at least 3.8 milliliters. And from that, he concluded that he is at least has a margin of error of equal to or greater than 1.3 milliliters. So to put before this jury what is at this point an argument asserting precise numbers when we don't know how the measurement was made, we don't know under what circumstances, we don't know what the margin of error was on the measurements, is misleading. And also this doesn't calculate the amount of blood that stuck to the pipetters and the microcentrifuge tubes, which can be fairly considerable when you add it all up.
All right. Well, here's the thing, though. The court controls the order of proof. I'll allow this subject to a motion to strike. It's the same situation. The foundation for the blood itself, I've allowed subject to a motion to strike. I'll allow this, which is the same topic, subject to a motion to strike. Since all of this, this particular exhibit has been completely modified to take away all of the other notations other than the amounts. All right, let's proceed. Let's have the jurors, please.
Check on the photographs, I'm sorry. And we did not get the particular photographs the defense introduced in discovery.
All right, we'll take that up at the noon break.
Thank you.
We'll take that up at the noon break. Matheson, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, record show reflect we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Blasier, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, may I display the exhibit?
You may. Have we marked this yet?
I don't think we have.
11:39. Well, that may be the max there, Mr. Douglas, on this one.
Mr. Matheson, I want to ask you just a few more questions about the blood vial. And I want you to assume again, hypothetically, that there was originally 8 milliliters of blood in that vial. You have that in mind?
Yes.
Now, your records indicate, the business records indicate that on June 14th, Colin Yamauchi withdrew approximately 1 milliliter, correct?
Approximately, that's correct.
And I'm afraid this is much too high for Can you reach that? Take off the 1 milliliter?
Mr. Cochran, for the purpose of this presentation, I would suggest we move this over here so it's at a workable level.
Your Honor, that's the only one that I can't reach.
Let's put it here. It'll be easy to work with.
Now, Mr. Matheson, do you agree that, following our hypothetical, that as of the 14th, after Mr. Yamauchi withdrew his approximately 1 milliliter, there would be approximately 7 milliliters left if you started with 8?
That's correct.
Now, the toxicology records that we talked about indicated that as of June 20th, there was 5.5 milliliters remaining, correct?
Approximately, according to the records, yes.
And there were no other withdrawals between Mr. Yamauchi's withdrawal on the 14th and when toxicology did their analysis on approximately the 20th, correct?
It's my understanding, yes.
So you would agree, would you not, that if that is the case, that there were approximately 1.5 milliliters of blood unaccounted for, and gone from Mr. Simpson's reference to?
Argumentative, unaccounted for, Your Honor. Calls for...
Rephrase the question.
You know where that 1.5 milliliters went?
Assumes facts not in evidence, argumentative.
Overruled. Rephrase the question, though.
Would you agree that, according to your own business records, that if there were 5.5 milliliters of blood remaining on the 21st, and there had only been 1 milliliter taken out of that blood, and you started with 8, there'd be 1.5 milliliters unaccounted for?
Improper hypothetical.
Overruled.
Also argumentative is unaccounted for.
Sustained.
Missing.
Rephrase the question.
1.5 milliliters less in that tube than you would expect.
Approximately, that's correct.
Now, the next withdrawal that your records indicate is on the 25th, and that would be, I'm sorry, the withdrawal for toxicology, would you agree that the records indicate that that microcentrifuge tube, which holds 1.5 milliliters maximum, was taken and some of that was returned?
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Do you mean some of the tube or some of the blood in the tube?
No, let me do that one again. The blood vial that you've examined that we saw in the picture has that microcentrifuge tube back in it, correct? With the vial.
Yes, that's correct.
And there's still some blood in that microcentrifuge tube, correct?
Yes, there is.
And that originally, as a maximum, would have held 1.5 milliliters, correct?
Correct.
And according to Mr. Yamauchi's notes, he estimated that there was approximately 3/4 of a mil left, correct?
That's what he recorded, yes.
Now, would you agree that, therefore, toxicology would have used approximately, at a maximum, 3/4 of a milliliter?
At a maximum, yes.
Now, if we remove 3/4 of a milliliter, we're now down to roughly 6.2, 6.3. Would you agree?
Approximately, yes.
Now, the next withdrawal was Mr. Yamauchi on the 25th for purposes of ABO typing and other serological typing, correct?
Yes.
And his records indicate that he took approximately 0.75, correct?
That's correct.
Now, I'm going to take down 0.70 to be conservative, even though it was 0.75.
I object to that being conservative. That's an underestimation.
Sustain, rephrase that.
Well,
That's argument, counsel.
Okay.
Just take it down.
I'm trying to figure out how to get to 0.75 here. This is approximately 0.05. Does that look like 0.05? Very small amount, isn't it?
In relation to your rest of your bars, yes, it is.
And if you remove 0.75, according to the business records that you've referred to, that would leave, at that point, approximately 5.5, correct?
Yes.
Now, you indicated at that point that you took, there was a small thread of just a couple of drops by Mr. Yamauchi on about the 27th, correct?
That
The
misstates
thread.
the testimony.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
On the 27th or thereabouts, Mr. Yamauchi took an extremely small amount for a thread, for electrophoresis, correct?
He prepared threads for electrophoresis, that's correct.
And that requires almost nothing, correct?
Well, the threads themselves require very little, but you do have loss in what's in the spot plate and what's in the pipetter.
Okay. Now, the defense was allowed to take 1 milliliter in September, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And there are records of that, are there not?
They were given approximately 1 milliliter, that's correct.
Now, you indicated that at some point you took out some blood, but the amount is not reflected in any business record anywhere.
That's correct.
So as far as the business records are concerned, in terms of what's written down when there are withdrawals, when there is an amount indicated, under the hypothetical, if, incidentally, have we taken off everything to account for all of the withdrawals where there is an amount written down?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. The only thing remaining is the one that you didn't write the amount down, correct?
That's correct.
Now, assume hypothetically again that on January, when you measured the quantity of blood left in both the reference tube and the microcentrifuge tube, there was a total of 2.6 milliliters. You have that assumption in mind?
Going off that assumption, yes.
Would you agree that under that hypothetical, following just the business records of withdrawals, that as of January of 1995, there would be a total of approximately 1.9 milliliters of blood unaccounted for?
Follow?
Unaccounted for,
Object to the phrase unaccounted for as
Sustained.
argumentative.
unaccounted for by the business records.
Well, it's still argumentative.
Oh, well.
If you're referring to only those that are specifically recorded and not taking into account what is left in pipettes, but actually what was delivered in certain areas, then that's a approximation, yes.
And by your earlier testimony in terms of the number of swatches, if you could get 150 swatches out of 1.5 milliliters, you could get correspondingly more swatches out of 1.9. Would you agree with that?
Yes, given the hypothetical.
Now, the only other withdrawal that we know about that you testified is the one that you did where you did not write down any particular amount, correct?
As I'm sitting here right now, right, that sounds correct.
And you indicated that you started with a half to 1 milliliter, that's your best recollection?
I would say I used a minimum of a half mil, and it could be as high as 1.
And according to what you had told us before, you don't recall it now, but you put it back.
Well, I remember making that comment,
I'm sorry,
yes.
what you didn't use.
That's correct.
And you used approximately 6 to 8 drops?
That is the amount that would actually be consumed in the test. That is not the amount that would not make its way back to the vial.
Okay. There are other amounts like clinging to the side of the or of whatever, the pipette or whatever you use to remove the blood, correct?
That's correct. That's why I gave the low end of being a 0.5 milliliter.
Okay. And you, now you indicated, I think, a couple days ago that rough estimate on what might have been caught on the side of the tubes was 1/4 of a mil, 0.25?
That's a rough approximation, as possible.
Now, and the 6 or 8 drops accounts for approximately how much?
As far as,
How many milliliters?
well, if we're using 20 as an approximation of the number of drops per mil, that's a little less than half a milliliter.
A little more than 1/4?
Yes.
So if we say, therefore, then approximately 1/4 to half is lost on the sides of the containers and is used up by you, and you took out 1 to start with, that would reduce the total amount of blood in the vial by a milliliter. Do you agree?
In that instance, yes, that'd be an approximation.
And if we remove a half a milliliter, we have now accounted for all of the known withdrawals that are recorded anywhere from Mr. Simpson's reference sample, correct?
That's argumentative because it was based on the hypothetical.
Sustained.
Hypothetically, under our hypothetical we've been talking about, we've accounted for everything that, under the hypothetical, was taken out of Mr. Simpson's reference tube, correct?
Well, you've accounted for everything except for, we gave the situation of the approximate amount that would be left in the vial that I worked on, or the centrifuge tube that I worked on. We have not taken into account, excuse me, every other transfer device or measuring device that is done by other people. An example being when we gave a milliliter to the defense on the date, I believe it was September 30th, there is going to be some retained in that. We delivered approximately a milliliter, but there's going to be a little bit more. And every time you open the cap up, there's blood clinging to the inside of the cap. You set that down normally with a Kim wipe, blood is going to be lost into the Kim wipe at that point. So there's constantly little bits that are going out just in the process of handling, and that has not yet been taken into account.
Now, these would you say approximately 1 milliliter was removed? That means it could be less, too, correct? All of those approximations could be lower.
Well, in relation to the one that Mr. Yamauchi did, on my transfer, the amount that I provided for the defense, that was done with a calibrated pipette. So 1 milliliter was delivered, then plus whatever adhered to the tips and to the vials and that type of thing would have been not returned.
But with the other entries, withdrawals that your people did, those are estimates and could be slightly less than a milliliter, correct?
They are approximations, yes. They could be either slightly less or slightly more.
So would you agree under the hypothetical that as of January, taking into account all of the other withdrawals that we've talked about, there is still approximately 1.5 milliliters that is not accounted for from the records and from your recollection of the withdrawal?
Argumentative as to accounted for.
Full roll.
I would say that it is probably less than that because of the other factors I mentioned, like losing it in the handling, opening the tube and the pipettes and that type of thing.
Now, Mr. Matheson, I want to ask you some questions about the blood found under Nicole Brown Simpson's fingernails. Do you have that in mind?
Yes, I do.
Now, is it true that in homicide cases, particularly homicide cases involving some form of assault, or physical assault, it is routine to collect the fingernails of the victims?
Yes, it is.
And the purpose for that is that the victim, possibly in an assault case, might fight back and might scratch someone and therefore get biological material, like blood, from the perpetrator under the fingernails, correct?
That's one of the reasons for collecting them, yes.
And there's even more reason to do that if you have an assaultive situation where the victim has defensive wounds on his or her hand, indicating a possible struggle.
Argumentative beyond the scope.
Overruled.
No foundation for this witness's opinion.
Sustained.
In any event, those are routinely taken for purposes of determining whether you can identify a perpetrator's blood under a victim's fingernails, correct?
Asked and answered.
Overruled. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, as I understand it, that was done in this case, and you conducted an examination of the scrapings from under the fingernails of Nicole Brown Simpson, correct?
That's correct.
And there were scrapings taken from both hands under all the fingernails on each hand, correct?
Yes.
And the numbers that we've used to designate those are 84, A, and B, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's the evidence item number that was used and the number that you've used in your lab for your testing purposes, correct?
Yes.
And 84A is which hand?
Referring to my analyzed evidence report that lists those items, 84A is the left-hand scrapings, 84B is the right-hand scrapings.
And the test results that you got from running an EAP test were that the blood under those nails on both hands was a type B, correct?
That's what the results were, yes.
And there is no one in this case that you have identified that has an EAP type B, correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Simpson doesn't have an EAP type B, does he?
No, he does not.
So would you agree then that if your test results are accurate, that there is blood under Nicole Brown Simpson's fingernails from someone other than Mr. Simpson?
If the B is an actual B, yes, that's correct.
And that's the results that you reported out, was a B, correct?
And that misstates his report and his findings.
Overruled.
That's correct, along with a explanation alternative.
Mr. Matheson, let me show you People's 218. Now you testified that was your analyzed evidence report, stating the results of your testing on the fingernails, among other things?
No, it is not.
There's another document that is actually your report, correct?
No, this is a report on a completely different set of items.
Have you been shown your report on the fingernails?
I have that sitting in front of me in my notebook. It isn't what you handed me.
I have a document marked, please? A three-page document titled Analyzed Evidence Report.
1140, Mrs. Robertson? All right, 1140, Mr. Blasier. Why don't you compare that with what Mr. Matheson has in his notebook?
Dated 9/8/94.
What,
Let me, I thought that was the other three-page report.
I think it was 218, Your Honor.
That's what we just looked at.
Mr. Matheson has 218, he indicates that is the wrong report.
Oh, no, what I have in front of me is 2 pages that are marked as 216 and a third page that is 218. It's a mixture of my 2 sets of reports.
All right, why don't you take a look at that, Mr. Blasier? They appear to be paper clipped together. An unusual clerical,
I think maybe, probably accidentally, we got reports mixed up yesterday or day before.
Well, I think there's one report that only has one.
I'd like to still have this marked as 1140.
what is it, Mr. Blasier?
It is an analyzed evidence report dated 9/8/94.
All right, so marked. Proceed.
Mr. Matheson, let me show you a document titled Analyzed Evidence Report dated 9/8/94. That is your complete report for the analysis of these items, including the fingernails, correct?
It is a copy of it, yes, with some areas that have been blacked out.
Now let me show you Prosecution Exhibit 218. What is that?
This is the third page, or a copy of the third page of that analyzed evidence report.
And that was not provided to you at the time you were asked to testify about your report by the prosecution, was it?
It's vague and also not relevant.
Sustained.
Have you testified about page 2 of that document at all yet in this proceeding?
Not relevant.
Sustained.
Take a look at page 2, please, for me.
Okay?
Now,
And when you say that document, are we talking about 1140?
yes.
All right.
When you do a test, such as the test that you did on the fingernails, you have what are called work papers, correct?
There are electrophoresis worksheets, yes.
And those are documents that you fill out while you're doing the actual bench work. You write down your observations of what you think the results are and how the test is done and that sort of thing, correct?
Yes, it is.
And after you do that, you prepare a final report from those bench notes, correct?
Actually, the bench notes of all the different electrophoresis runs that are associated with a case then are placed onto what we call a summary sheet, which brings all the results from all the tests together into one place, along with some of the observations. Then the information from the summary sheet is then transferred onto the final report.
And the summary sheet is your final reading of typing for tests that you've done, correct?
It lists, yes, the final readings.
Now, I'd like to display this on the demo. We need to...
basis? Legal basis?
It contains inadmissible evidence, and that's confusing. Inadequate foundation. I can't articulate it.
All right, let me see, counsel at the sidebar, let me have a, let me see the document. All right, Mr. Blasier, which chart is this?
I think it's 302.
No. Well, when it comes down, we'll take a look at it.
Mr. Matheson, you've seen that chart before, and you've testified about it, correct?
Yes, I have.
And in that chart, it's indicated, this, by the way, who prepared this chart?
It was prepared by the DA's office.
You didn't prepare it, did you?
No, I did not.
Item number 42 is the sample taken from the area under Nicole Brown Simpson, correct?
Yes, it is.
And one of the arguments that the prosecution is using to say that your test results on the nail scrapings are something other than they are.
Counsel, you need to rephrase that
Okay.
question. All right, and for the record, this is People's 202, the chart.
202. In your report that you prepared after your analysis, you determined that item 42 was inconclusive, correct?
That's correct.
And what's the scientific definition or meaning of the term inconclusive?
Inconclusive to me means that there's not a conclusive decision or conclusive statement that can be made about the results.
Doesn't it mean scientifically that you can make no statements about the source of the stain when it's inconclusive?
Well, I don't report a inconclusive result. So yes, I would not make a statement about the source based on an inconclusive result.
Now, but in this case, you're asking to make some conclusion about the source of the stain of 42, even though it's an inconclusive, aren't you?
That misstates the evidence.
when you reported your findings on 84A and B, does your report say B asterisk?
No, it does not.
It says B, doesn't it?
Yes,
It says B for both the left hand and the right hand, doesn't it?
that's correct.
Now, do I understand that it's your position now from your testimony that you're asking that, or you're stating that the B is something other than a B?
That misstates the testimony, too.
Overruled. I am not saying that the B that I observed is anything other than what I am seeing, and that's the two bands in the B area. I'm merely stating that there's possible other explanations in addition to it being a type B.
Now, all of the other serological results that you've testified to, you've testified that your results are accurate, or you believe they're accurate, correct?
That also misstates the testimony.
Overruled. I believe all of my results are accurate.
Is there any other test that you did where you got a reading or a result that you reported that you're asking us to accept as being inaccurate, except that one?
I'm not stating that this one is inaccurate. I'm just stating that there is an alternate explanation for what I'm seeing on the gel.
Okay, so it looks like a B, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And what you're saying is that, in your opinion, sometimes something else can look like a B that isn't a B, correct?
That's correct.
And that's a BA, correct?
That's correct.
But in this case, you saw a B, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Now, how long has the Los Angeles Police Department been using the EAP system?
I believe that we have been running EAP as part of a system for, well, it was in existence when I started doing my testing, which was in 1982, and I believe that it had been being used for a few years before that, 2 to 4, 6, something like that.
Can you give me just a real rough estimate of the number of cases that you've worked on where you've done an EAP test?
I would like to check my record and see if I made an estimation of that.
Sure.
Okay, the chart that I prepared of tests that I run did not include the EAP. I can give you a rough estimate based on some of the other markers that I've done.
Okay.
And I would say that I have run somewhere between, I don't know, probably 1,500 and about 2,000 items for that marker.
And an EAB type B is a fairly common type, isn't it?
I believe it is, yes.
So can you give us, do you know what percentage of the population is a B?
I'd have to check another chart that I have.
Why don't you do that?
According to our statistics that we use, it's approximately 50% of the general population.
And would it be fair to infer from that that of the approximately 1,500 times you've done this test, roughly half of them would come back EAP-B?
That's correct.
And have you testified in court before about EAP results that have come back as a B?
Yes, I have.
And of course, in these approximately 750 cases, I assume you've written reports that have said, I tested it, looks like an EAP-B to me, correct?
Yes.
In all of those reports, do you write down, you know, it could be a BA?
Not in all those reports, no. I do include that disclaimer when the EAP is a source of elimination or exclusion in a sample.
Have you testified in court where an EAP-B happens to be the type of the suspect and also the evidence you tested that it's an EAP type B without giving that disclaimer?
Like I just mentioned, I will put that it's a B unless it's an exclusion of some type.
Can I take that as a yes? You have so testified in cases that an EAP-B result is a B when it incriminates a defendant without saying that it could have been a BA?
Yes.
Now, as I understand your argument that this B that you found is something other than a B is based on two things. One, scientific literature.
Mr. Blasier, would you,
Argument.
I'm sorry?
excuse me, would you rephrase that question, please? When you start out your argument that,
You testified yesterday that one of the reasons you're here to say that that this B might have been a BA is because of the scientific literature, correct?
That's one of the things, yes.
And one of the other things is that, that you testified to, is that because sample 42 has the same findings or similar findings as 85, and since 42 appears to have come from the victim, then therefore the fingernail, the blood on the fingernails may have come from the victim as well. Have I got that right?
No, I believe the other reason that I use is personal experience in both this case and other cases.
Did you not use the example of 42 as well?
Yes, but I don't think that was your question on this particular instance.
Have you ever written any papers or published anything on EAP systems?
No, I have not.
Have you